This is the team I got rank 1 with, and here you can see my standing is 1762. And I think before I get into the specifics of the team, it would be helpful to talk about the common threats of the Uber's tier, and demonstrate how this team deals with them to help show my thought process and help you understand how this team functions. So one thing I've come to appreciate from playing this team is diversity in a Pokemon. Its ability to not only wall some threats, but also be able to check others. Because take this scenario, let's say your primary wall for whatever threat has been chipped or damaged through the efforts of your opponent, and it's not going to be able to stop it from setting up. Um, And so, but you have two other checks to the setup sweeper. One of them you need for something else, and the other you don't. Well, then you can just send the check that you don't need, and you know neutralize the threat, right? And your opponent's fun is over. And that is just an illustration of how like diversity and utility in a Pokemon is very useful, especially on a stall team. Like if you take something super niche and specific that doesn't have a lot of overall utility but counters something very common, like there are a lot of decent Calyrex counters because its coverage is so bad, but that doesn't make it a great fit for a stall team because of its lack of utility. It's not going to be able to aid you in dealing with all the other things that you're going to have to deal with. It's not going to be able to check a lot. And having multiple checks to things is um, part of what makes a stall team really good. It's like, you have many lines of defense when your primary wall is broken. So that's what I've sort of taken from working on this team, and I think that going over all the specific threats is going to help accentuate that point even further. So I'm going to start with Banded Dracovish, who outside of Rain is easy enough to dance around, but with Rain, it becomes the single biggest threat to this team as far as a wall breaker goes. And wall breakers, unlike setup sweepers, have to be dealt with consistently throughout a game because they don't rely on setting up. They're always going to be there to wreck your team, and it's going to be easy to switch them in, and they're ready to go. So I think the first thing on the mind of someone building a stall team should be, how are you going to deal with these wall breakers who don't rely on setting up and aren't necessarily subject to a lot of chip damage from attacks, because as soon as they get in, you're forced to switch out, or you're just gonna die. Um, and Dracovish in Rain is I'd say the weak point of this team as it is right now. However, it could be tweaked to get if you gave Toxapex utility umbrella to ignore Rain. I think that would help. So that's just one weakness of the team that I think is fixable while still retaining the integrity of the team and the purpose of the team. But that's just something that I wanted to throw out there. The next threat, so I'm going to go down the list here. We have Yveltal Life Orb, who is one of the biggest threats for stall teams because he's fast. He is not checked by Calyrex, who Scarf Calyrex can be used defensively a lot of the time on stall teams to check setup sweepers, and Yveltal just doesn't care. And it'll often be one of the faster than your whole team, and it has taunt, so you can't recover stall it. So this team is going to, the priority number one is going to be to knock off its Life Orb, and that will allow you to switch between Toxapex and Ho-Oh in order to, get off some damage here, get off Sacred Fire. If you're lucky, you can get off Toxic with some good enough mind games, because they're going to want to taunt the Ho-Oh, but they're going to want to hit the Toxapex on the switch and deny it free recovery. So it's reliable enough to damage it and to wear it down. And then That's also is some merit for some extra special defense on these regenerator Pokemon just for that purpose alone, which I think they can afford a little bit, especially Ho-Oh. Not Toxapex is a very important physical wall, but I think Ho-Oh could use a little more special defense. It does scout and check some physical threats, so I wouldn't go crazy, but that is something that you can consider doing. And then lastly, also speaking of Yveltal, we have our own, who is specifically max speed to aid in dealing with Life Orb Yveltal because it's such a threat for a slow team like this. Because this team doesn't really check anything with speed except this Yveltal here. And its purpose is actually just to speed tie with the Life Orb Yveltal so you can potentially get a roost off while either using knockoff or aiding in your attempts to wear it down. And of course we have max special defense to deal with Calyrex, but we'll get there. All right. So next we got Specs Kyogre, another very prominent wall breaker that just has to be on the mind of a stall player. It has to be something that you can switch and do consistently and deal with. And I did have quite a dilemma initially when I was building this team about how to go about it without being weak to some other things that were on my mind. So I decided to make a concession and remove heavy duty boots from Blissey and give it utility umbrella, which if you don't know, just makes you ignore weather effects, meaning that Kyogre isn't rain boosted anymore, meaning that Blissey can now check it. And that is also partly why I have extra special defense, special bulk in Blissey, is to more comfortably deal with Kyogre, but I still wanted some physical bulk so that I have a little more utility in how I use Blissey. Can wall things that are burnt, for example. And then, so moving on, we have Geomancy Xerneas. Always a scary Pokemon. We have quite a few checks to it, depending on what kind of coverage it's running. And we also have a hard wall, or a decent wall in Blissey as well. Because of Confide, which, if you don't know, ignores Substitute. So it's going to stall out. It has just enough PP to stall out its Geomancy. And it's going to allow Blissey to wall it if need be. Or if I don't want to wall it with Blissey just yet, let's say I want to preserve its HP, then I can send out Ho-Oh as a check. And this is a common check to answer to Xerneas, is phasing it out with Ho-Oh. Now, some Xerneas have adapted to Ho-Oh specifically by running Ingrain, which prevents them from being phased. So that can be annoying, but luckily we have Ferrothorn and Toxapex to wall Xerneas at that point. Because if it's running Geomancy, Moonblast, and Ingrain, then it only has one coverage move. If it's Thunder, then it gets walled by Ferrothorn. If it's Focus Blast, then it gets walled by Toxapex. So you can see how the great typing and utility of all these Pokemon help aid when things don't always go according to plan. Like when if Xerneas has Psyshock, then it is not going to be walled by this variant of Blissey because it's doing damage based on its defense, but we will have backup answers to it. And hopefully our team won't be overrun once the Xerneas has been taken care of. Next, we have Pheromosa. It can be a threat to specific teams, but for this team, it's pretty easy to play around because it's usually Banded or Scarfed. And we have Ho-Oh, which is always a great scout, a great pivot, a great check to Pheromosa. And then we can switch out to the appropriate Mon to counter whatever move it's locked into. All right, Banded Zacian is admittedly kind of scary because Quagsire, I don't know if Quagsire, I think on a lowish roll, then maybe Quagsire could actually survive. I don't know if it's a roll or not, but it's kind of a pretty shaky check to a Banded variant. Of course, they have to predict correctly, so there's room to play around it. But any other variant of Zacian, like Swords Dance, for example, is going to get hard-walled by Quagsire. So that's Zacian. All right. Calyrex is an interesting topic because we don't have a dedicated wall, a hard wall, like especially defensive Yveltal. for the reasons I mentioned earlier about dealing with Life Orb Yveltal. So, the interaction goes like this, right? If it's Subseed, Nasty Plot Mono Ghost, then it gets walled by Blissey, and then you could potentially play around it. And it's gonna have to deal with Yveltal too. And it also means that Yveltal can die, and it's not really the end of the world. You can drain some of its PP before it does. If it's sub Nasty Plot, Astral Barrage, and Psyshock, then it can get phased out with Ho-Oh because Ho-Oh can usually doesn't get to it KO'd by Calyrex without like specs, which also makes it a great pivot and scout for Calyrex. And then the scariest variant is just going to be a Nasty Plot variant with like Draining Kiss and Focus Sash. So that I have found that to be quite popular, and it is scary. And I do have a clip here. Well, when usually Yveltal will get chipped a little bit, but it'll manage to be able to use knockoff on Calyrex or something like that, even after it sets up. And then after that, it gets checked by Quagsire. Calyrex does at low health because Unaware ignores its boosts, and even with its no investment in special defense besides its HP, it still manages to survive with little health. But that is the last line of defense against that form of Calyrex. But it has saved the team so many times, and it allows me to, not run the most specially defensive Yveltal. So I really appreciate that. And it's a great example of utility in a Pokemon, and overlapping coverage and having extra checks to something just really keeps this team intact because you can't predict what kind of team they're going to have. They're going to have any combination of a lot of dangerous threats, and the more versatile your team is, then the safer you are in general, and as a general rule, because of how diverse teams can be. And next we have Dragon Dance Zekrom. No matter what variant, unless it's like Weather Ball with Groudon, then Ferrothorn is going to wall it pretty hard. And this is, I think, the most creative piece of the team because of Iron Defense mainly, and Maximum Defense lets it wall Zekrom entirely. Like, for example, if I was using Shedinja to wall Kyogre, and this was the dilemma I was having, right? It's like, I want to wall Kyogre, but Shedinja doesn't help against like Zekrom, and I don't want to just start a whole nother team, right? And change the integrity of the team. Then I decided to make Blissey the Kyogre wall and use Ferrothorn to patch up my weakness against Zekrom because Quagsire can't ignore its boost because of Terravolt, and it just 2-hit KOs it after a Dragon Dance. So, but this Ferrothorn stands in its way pretty hard and patches up some holes. I think Iron Defense and Body Press are mandatory for this type of niche, and Leech Seed I think is pretty mandatory as well. Spikes being well, I'll go over the movesets and their specifics once I get down this list. So next we got Duskmane Necrozma, another victim of Ferrothorn's walling capabilities. It's gonna you're gonna handle it exactly the same way you Zekrom. You switch in. Sometimes you'll switch into a defensive set because you got to scout it first, right? You don't want to just send Ho-Oh in at first because it can Stone Edge and Oko you. So I like to send Ferrothorn as my default scout to Duskmane Necrozma. Unless it's obviously a stall team or something, or a balance team, then I might just, throw in one of my defoggers. But send in this guy, and you can wall him pretty good. And he's a better check than Quagsire because Sunsteel Strike ignores Unaware, but so does Photon Geyser. So if it's one of the rare variants running Photon Geyser, which they might otherwise do if they were trying to adapt to like Quagsire, then Quagsire will just melt because Photon Geyser not only does it not resist, but it doesn't ignore the boost because of the way Photon Geyser ignores abilities. But Ferrothorn is going to stand in its way pretty hard. Then we have Marshadow. So Marshadow I found was consistently able to break through my team despite me playing around it when it was a variant that had like Choice Band or Life Orb, and I couldn't manage to knock it off if the opponent was smart about how they switched it in. So I decided to do something some might consider like creative and remove the item from Toxapex so that I can completely wall the variants that run Poltergeist, which is an annoying move because it ignores Baneful Bunker's poisoning and it ignores like Rocky Helmet and stuff. And with no item, then Toxapex just completely walls it, and it is no longer a threat to this team. And it just wins games. Alright, next one is Double Dance Groudon, and also Groudon with a fire move. So some people like to use like Tangrowth to wall things like Groudon and even Zygarde. And my biggest problem with Tangrowth is that one, Groudon can run Fire Blast and OHKO it, and Zygarde is starting to see a lot of them with Toxic, at least at the higher ratings, which would also ruin Tangrowth because it can just switch out and come back later. But Toxic also ruins Quagsire. But Ferrothorn walls the heck out of Zygarde and that variant, especially the Toxic variant. And then if that fails or you're trying to preserve Ferrothorn, then you can phase it out with Ho-Oh, of course. A couple of times, right? I mean, if Ho-Oh's poisoned, then it's gonna start adding up, switching into those ground moves. Next, we have Meteor Beam Eternatus. That is dealt with by Blissey, primarily. Actually, entirely, because it's gonna switch in. I usually always switch in Blissey first the first time against Eternatus, so that just in case it's Meteor Beam, and so I can scout its moveset. If you get a little bit of chip on Eternatus and you see that it has leftovers, then you don't need to send Blissey in on it. You can send Toxapex in Ho-Oh because the duo Regenerator Core is going to wall it pretty well, depending on how offensive it is. But it's going to annoy it because it's going to get burnt and it's going to get worn down. But it does lend to longer games when I'm trying to like Regenerator stall Eternatus, but that's just how it works. And next we have, we talked about Zygarde, Regieleki. Walling Regieleki with Blissey is kind of a bad idea because if the opponent has a plan and their goal is to like break down your Blissey or something, then they might use Explosion on Regieleki and then your Blissey can die, or the constant volt switching. And this is assuming you don't have Quagsire, right? I'm getting there, but the constant volt switching is going to chip the Blissey, and then that facilitates something like a Specs Kyogre to come in and just ruin your team. So, one thing, I have Quagsire to wall just completely blank Regieleki. Oh yeah, he's the Regieleki wall. Next we have Rayquaza. So initially I was kind of afraid of Rayquaza for some reason. I guess my Necrozma has been OHKO'd by V-Create too many times. So Toxapex is a lot of times they like to lead Rayquaza. So if in that scenario, I would probably lead Toxapex because it doesn't get OHKO'd by any of its banded moves, which is great. And if it is a setup variant with Dragon Dance or Swords Dance, then you can just send Quagsire and wall it pretty hard that way. And then lastly, Darmanitan. The only time Darmanitan is scary because if it doesn't have Rock Slide, then Ho-Oh can pivot around it really easily. If it has Rock Slide, then obviously that sucks because Ho-Oh is just going to die. So maybe consider scouting it first with Toxapex, seeing if it's a Scarf set or a Bandit set. And then kind of, it's usually not a problem because a lot of them don't run Rock Slide. Because I want like U-turn, Ice, Fire, and Ground. So I guess if they had Rock Slide, then they'd probably be giving up coverage on something. But yeah, it's usually not much of a threat to this team. All right. Lastly, I'm going to talk about Urshifu because he is probably he doesn't get hard walled by anything, and I don't have the greatest pivots to him either. So he can be scary, and Toxapec's only going to switch into him so much with his wicked blows and stuff. It's got low PP, which is nice, but one thing that happened one time was that Urshifu switched into my Quagsire, and I used counter, and he died, which was nice. More about counter later. So anyway, that's all the threats that I have written down, and now I'm gonna go over the moveset. So this is kind of mostly a typical Toxapex set. I think that Scout and Knockoff are just kind of good general moves because they make progress even against like in slower games. Like Scald can burn Eternatus, which is a common switch in. The most mandatory thing on this set is Baneful Bunker, just because of the way the team works. I don't have Rocky Helmet, and Baneful Bunker is oftentimes not only a great way to scout what move banded users are going to use, but also to poison and chip Pokemon when I can't rely on Rocky Helmet to do so. And then Pain Split is the most replaceable move on this entire team, in my opinion, the way I feel about it right now. So in my thought process when adding Pain Split was that I can damage things while I guess it helps stalling out Eternatus, which isn't really a big deal, but it's just a luxury, and it damages it, which forces it to use more PP, which is okay. But it could be replaced with pretty much anything. I'm not sure. Maybe like Haze, I don't know. Alright, Blissey. Oh, and like I said, no item. No item helps against Marshadow, but it also helps against knockoff users because Toxapex is. I often use it to switch into knockoff users like Yveltal. Yeah, that's the main one, and it just helps a little bit. Utility Umbrella, Blissey, Natural Cure, Confide is pretty mandatory because it's the only way I can deal with Meteor Beam stuff and boosting stuff a lot of the times, and Calm Minds and whatnot. Aromatherapy, I don't know if this is a luxury. I've never tried taking it off, but I think one reason I'm really hesitant to take it off is that when Ho-Oh gets status like Toxic, then it can no longer stall out Stealth Rock from Dustmane Necrozma. So it's just something I've never considered removing, but you could consider removing it, adding something else. Stealth Rock, I would keep it because it helps mainly deal with offensive threats, getting free switches over and over again. Of course, like passive damage does, but Ferrothorn has spikes, so I don't know. But it's pretty good. Quagsire, well, it's pretty standard. Quagsire is leftovers because it barely counters the things it needs to counter. It's not the bulkiest thing ever. Earthquake and Scald can be replaced, I would say, in some ways. I like having a move to kill a low health Calyrex. I would keep that. And Scald is nice for burning Groudon. But the crit rule, probably my favorite decision was to put counter on this Quagsire because it's a last line of defense to set up physical sweepers like Zekrom, for example. For like if Ferrothorn gets worn out somehow, or whatever wall that I need gets worn down, then Quagsire can surprise them with counter and OHKO them, which it has come in handy quite a bit. So I would keep that. Ferrothorn, it needs Iron Defense and Body Press to wall the things it needs to wall, mainly Necrozma and Zekrom. And Leech Seed gives it the recovery that it needs to stay healthy throughout a game when it's forced to switch in a lot. Spikes aids with preventing, especially threats that are hard to wall for this team from switching in freely over and over again. And then Leftovers, I would keep that so that it doesn't get worn down as easily. But it's actually been so good at staying healthy that you could consider removing Leftovers or Leech Seed or something. I don't know about Leech Seed though. I'd probably keep that. Ho-Oh is this one's pretty standard. It's just a great scout pivot, and it scout sets, and it absorbs banded attacks, and it checks Xerneas with Whirlwind. I think Toxic could be replaced maybe with, yeah. I mean, it's not the very mandatory move, so it could be tweaked a bit. Could also maybe use a little more special defense because of how often it's tasked with switching into Life Orb Yveltal. And then last we have Yveltal. This is max speed for Life Orb Yveltal. Foul Play is probably the least useful move, at least in my last few games. I don't know, but it's there just to check things, slow stuff that's boosted to kill stuff like Calyrex Ice, for example. And then I would keep knockoff for sure because its speed is nice in that it can surprise opponents a lot, and it prevents it from being uh, uh, things like Dracovish and Kyogre from getting free attacks off on your team. And it can surprise them and knock off the choice band or the choice specs, so that's really nice. All right, so with all that being said, I want to. This is actually the last game I played to rank 1, and I just want to go over it. I really like it though, for a couple points that I wanted to show off visually, and let's just get into the game. So it's a hyper offense team, as you can kind of see. Has Galvantula. So it's going to lead Toxic, which is good. I'm just wearing it down with Ho-Oh. I don't really need Ho-Oh. And then he uses Sticky Web, which is kind of pointless because my team doesn't check anything with speed, really. So Sticky Web is not a factor, which is one of the nice things about not relying on like a Scarfer to defensively check things, so that I don't have to deal with webs. So he sends out the Silvally, and I've never seen this in Ubers, and like, so I'm trying to like figure out what it does, and I'm calculating like how much damage it's gonna do, and I decided to check it with Toxapex. So he is indeed a Swords Dance sweeper, and he's dark. So I managed to get the poison off. Just gonna get me some necessary chip on him, and then he's just going to go to town. I'm going to knock off because I'm a dummy, and I thought I could knock off his plate, but I can't. But it turns out to not matter too much. But it would have been nice to not have my Toxapex chip like that. And then, so I'm going to wall it with Quagsire, because it's going to ignore its Swords Dance. And then, so that threat is gone. And my Quagsire manages to stay healthy enough so that I can check Zacian, because I also need to deal with that. Now he sends out Xerneas, and this is where the game gets kind of crazy. So I decided to go on Blissey instead of Ho-Oh, and I think I'm just gonna Confide Stall it. But he reveals Psyshock, which means Blissey is going to be broken by the Xerneas. But it also means that I don't need Blissey anyway, and because he has Psyshock, I can then phase it out with Ho-Oh, except that he reveals Ingrain, which is also really bad. Now I'm just wasting all this time trying to deal with the Xerneas. And so you can see how even despite that, I'm able to deal with him because of all the checks that I have to him and the versatility of the Pokemon on the team. And I managed to wear him down, sack my Veltal for some poison damage. I don't know if that was the best move, but I managed to deal with this. Gonna protect, stall it for some poison damage, and get some regenerator on my Toxapex. And then my Ho is gonna come in, and he's gonna KO, or the Xerneas is gonna die. So because of its bad coverage, then my other checks managed to deal with it, which is another idea that I've sort of been able to comprehend by playing this team, is that you don't have to have an all-in-one check to every variant of a Pokemon. You can have, in some cases, multiple checks. Like if this Xerneas was Thunder, Moonblast, Ingrain, it would get checked by Blissey. If it was Psyshock, Moonblast, Thunder, then it would get checked by like Ferrothorn. So you do have these different combinations, but they all get checked one way or another. And the Pokemon that I'm scouting it with, in this case Blissey, is also the Pokemon that I need least in this matchup. Uh, so it all works out. And then he sends out Zacian, who and I lead Quagsire because Zacian is a little scary because Quagsire can't really switch in his current state, and then I manage to heal him to full, and then I go. What do? I go to Toxapex because I'm anticipating like a Thunderbolt or something. And I managed to KO the Galvantula. Nice. Alright, Necrozma, I'm going to scout him out with Ferrothorn. This is my dedicated Necrozma wall. Of course, he's Dragon Dance because this is a hyper-offensive team. And then you can see it only does 36%, and I'm going to boost my defense. And this thing's going to get hard-walled. And what do I do now? Leech Seed? Yes, because I want to heal up because, I mean, he might switch, and I want to be good for the next time he tries to set up. Alright, now I'm going to Toxapex to wall the Marshadow, and then he goes Ashen, so I got to go Quagsire, but not before I protect, and I managed to poison it, luckily. And then I'm sending out Quagsire, and then I don't know. Oh, and then he uses close combat here, predicting, I guess, Ferrothorn or Quag. I don't know what he's predicting. All right, and then I knock off his life orb, which is going to allow my Quagsire to easily stall him if it comes to that, but he revealed Poltergeist and learns that my Toxapex has no item. And that's the game, and I just love that game just because of how grim it looked with the Xerneas, but because of the versatility and overlapping defensive coverage that my team had, then I was able to deal with it in a less than ideal situation, while still being able to deal with the rest of his threats. So, anyways, that's it. I hope you found that fun to listen to, and I had fun talking about it. So, thanks. See you next time.